and I've worked for Bloomberg and done some consulting. And the reason I'm here for the IGF is just because I care passionately about what's happening here at the IGF, and I think more people like yourselves can use the IGF as a place to meet people, learn about the most important issues, and build relationships that you can use throughout the year as you grapple with really important issues. Many of the issues you're facing are the same ones that we've been facing for 25 years in the United States. How can we get affordable access? How can we use telecommunications and IT in government? How can we protect privacy? How can we prevent cybercrime? How can we protect the security of our networks? All of those issues are going to be discussed here. But the most important thing that your country needs and our country needs right now is a positive vision of what this technology can do for the average citizen in your country. We did that 20 years ago. When I was at the White House, we published 3 very important reports. The first one was called the National Information Infrastructure Agenda for Action. And that was probably the most important report. That was published in 1993, the first year that President Clinton was in the White House. And it outlined what the internet could do for all Americans. 2 years later, we wrote the Global Information Infrastructure. It was a vision about what the internet could do for all people everywhere. And in 1997, we wrote the framework for global e-commerce. And that was focused just on e-commerce. But those 3 books were really important. They were short, only about 15 pages, and they painted a picture of what the world could be, a very positive picture. We talked about e-commerce, online schools, online libraries, entertainment, e-government, online healthcare, and we made it all happen. Partly because everybody agreed on that vision. It was a very exciting vision. Today we have even more powerful tools. We have not only the internet, but we have mobile broadband, so we can use wireless telecommunications to get internet to everybody. We have smartphones that are far more powerful than any laptop I had 10 years ago, and far cheaper. We have the Internet of Things. Very soon in our country, everybody will have 50, maybe 100 devices that connect to the internet. Not just our laptop and our phone, but our thermostat, our car, our pets. My dog will be online. I carry around a Fitbit. Does anybody have a Fitbit? Do you know what these are? It's a monitor. It's very small. It just fits in my pocket, and it counts how many steps I take every day, so I can see if I'm getting enough exercise. And more importantly, I can compare how much exercise I get with how much exercise my family members, and my daughter in particular, are getting. And so online, I can push them a little harder to run a little more or walk a little more. But all of us are going to have these little devices that will help us understand what's going on in our lives, help us be safer, more productive, healthier, and save energy, save money. There's a lot of ways in which this technology can help us. The Internet of Things is going to plug into the cloud. Cloud computing, as we all know, is providing very inexpensive computing. It's making social media possible. Cloud computing is about 10 times cheaper than trying to manage your own computing resources. All this is such an exciting catalog of technologies, and yet we don't tell people what they're going to do with it. We haven't communicated very effectively how much this is going to change everyone's life. So don't focus just on the technology, don't focus just on policy. Spend some time telling stories that the average citizen in your country can understand. And if the average citizen understands how exciting the future can be, they will let the politicians know how exciting the future can be, and they will let the politicians know how much they want that future. In my experience, politicians can be incredibly helpful. Even one politician, like Al Gore, who understood the potential of internet, can push and push and push and share that vision. But what's really useful is when there's a broad consensus and everyone's excited. Right now in our country, there's a lot of fear about technology. There's fear that this is going to eliminate jobs, or that there's hackers and cybercrime and terrible things happening online. That is so small compared to the benefits. And yet we spend a lot more time talking about the bad side, the dark side. So focus on the positive, spend some time painting a picture, writing that short 4-page speech or that 7-page report that explains why what you're doing is probably the most important thing you can be doing in your country right now. And learn from what's happening elsewhere. There's lots of great stories about what's going on in Chile and Taiwan and France and Brazil. Over the next 5 days, you'll hear some incredible stories about what this technology is doing for even the poorest countries. And you can bring those ideas and those stories back to your own country. So I hope this is very high level. This is very broad. I'm happy to talk about individual problems you have. I'm also very happy to connect with you afterwards. You can send me email. Twitter is actually the best way to reach me. My Twitter handle is very simple. It's just Mike Nelson. You can also send me email, mnelson@pobox.com. And I use LinkedIn a lot. How many of you are on LinkedIn? Good. All of you should be on LinkedIn. It's a great way to find talent and expertise. I mentioned I've been teaching at Georgetown University for 5 years. As a teacher, I often bring in experts from the outside. I often find them through LinkedIn. I often find the most current information by asking my friends on LinkedIn. And I'm going to finish by giving you a reading assignment. Professor, I always give reading assignments. One place to look for the vision is at the new Internet Society report. There's a brand new report from the Internet Society. It was released in April. It's called the Internet Report 2014. And it lays out the economic benefits of the Internet. I'd also recommend another really important place to go, which is the Internet Society web page. They provide resources on a lot of developments around the world. I've been a member of the Internet Society for about 20 years, and I'm a leader in the local Washington, D.C. chapter. If you look at the Internet Society webpage, you'll see a lot of webcasts of interesting discussions about the future of the Internet. It's a great place to go. Keep an eye on where the Internet's going, and you can get there faster than anybody else. And I'm happy to help you do that, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, or I can just sit here and talk for another half hour. As a professor, I'm used to doing that. Turn me on and I talk for an hour. Okay.
Actually, I need your advice about e-commerce and e-payment, because in Iraq last year there is about 4 websites created like eBay for buying and selling things, and the problem they had, it's the e-payment, because in Iraq most banking don't apply the e-payment because they are afraid from the cybercrime and these issues. So how to encourage them, how to encourage the banks to apply the e-payment and allow this website to, so the people can buy and sell things by Visa card or MasterCard or?
Well, the problem in a lot of countries is that people don't have Visa and MasterCard. They don't have credit cards. And so some of the most successful e-payments have actually been done by the mobile phone operators. Are you familiar with M-Pesa? M, the letter M, P-E-S-A? This is a very successful e-payment system in Kenya. And if you look around here at IGF, you'll find some people from Kenya who can talk to you about M-Pesa. And millions of people in Kenya are using their cell phones, not a smartphone, just a cell phone, to exchange money. And it's dramatically cutting the cost of moving money.
So they make agreement with
The mobile operator, not the banks or the credit card companies, manage the mobile payments. And it's simple, it's safe, and it has changed the way that millions of people, not just in Kenya, but in other countries in Africa, are moving money. It's interesting because in some countries they're using it to prevent bribery. So if a policeman stops a driver and says, well, you have to pay me, 25 euros, or I'll give you a big ticket. And the driver says, I don't have any money, I'll pay you with M-Pesa. End of bribe. So it's one model to look at. I think in so many countries, the banking infrastructure is not there. Very few people have credit cards. So again, this is an example of where you can learn from other countries, and M-Pesa has been a big success. And if you can't find a person to talk to about it, just send me an email. Yeah. I do think when we did our report on e-commerce at the White House, it was funny because 90% of the attention was about e-commerce websites and how do you sell things. And 9% of the attention was about how do you pay for the things that you buy. And 1% was about how do you deliver the things that you get that are bought. And of course, in many countries, that's the biggest problem. There isn't a good post office, or if there is a post office, you don't know whether things will be delivered or whether the package will be opened and something will be taken out. In most countries, it's almost the opposite. They have to focus on that first delivery part of the story. But that's something I know your countries are working on too. It's a big challenge. But the internet can push, right? The internet can help motivate people to get a better postal service. Well, we have three different major carriers. We have the U.S. government post office, we have the U.S. Postal Service, which is a private company, and then we have FedEx, which is a private company. So we have real competition for the delivery of packages. Most letters still go through the government post office, but competition is good, and that's another model that we've proven very effective in your countries as well. In mobile phone, how many mobile carriers do you have in your country now? 3? Yeah. In some countries, they have 6 or 7, and the prices are lower than the U.S. The service is better. Yeah, more, and that's again, that's a hard message when the people who are in the market don't want competition, but the citizens need it. So that's another. I have a list of the things that you need for success, and competition, innovation, investment, education, and transparency. Transparency is another really important element. If people know what's going on, if you can use the internet to tell people about what services are available, which carriers are better and more reliable. I'm a big believer in big data, which is another part of the equation. If you can collect data on the services that are available and use the internet to share that data, that will lead to more competition, more choice, more informed consumers, and that will put pressure to innovate and reduce cost. So there's a lot of things going on. The other thing that's really important, and we'll talk about it over the next week, multi-stakeholder. Have you all heard about multi-stakeholder? Well, there's another piece of multi-stakeholder, and that is bottom-up, decentralized multi-stakeholder. Lots of different people with lots of different ideas, bringing ideas to the table. Over the next 5 days, you'll hear some people say multi-stakeholder. And these are mostly government people. And what they say when they say multi-stakeholder, they really mean, we the government decide, but we'll listen to all you little people. That's not multi-stakeholder. That is not the multi-stakeholder model. The multi-stakeholder model is when all the people are out solving problems and getting ideas and sharing the ideas with others. And in some cases, competing to see who has the best idea. And whether it's better ways to protect privacy, better ways to deliver broadband, better ways to do e-payments. I mean, you have this really healthy marketplace of ideas. And with the internet, all these different groups will be talking to each other. And most importantly, talking to users or the potential users and learning from them. That's the multi-stakeholder model that's worked so well for the internet. For 25 years, I've been working in this, and it's crazy. It's just, it seems like chaos because there's 100 different groups that are doing important things about different pieces of the internet. And it's not coordinated, and it should never be centralized, and it should never be coordinated. You want this diversity of ideas, and you want the flexibility that comes with that. That's the multi-stakeholder model. And unfortunately, some people want to use that term to refer to a completely opposite, top-down, centralized, bureaucratic, slow-moving system that they want to create. That's not what we need here. We need to continue the diversity. We want little cute things like that to happen. And it happens because we have permissionless innovation. When they created this Fitbit, nobody had to give permission to use the internet to collect the data. The internet was there, and it was open. And that's what is going to make your country great, and that's what's going to make your country great. Permissionless innovation and really smart people who can try out new things. And I see Mike Goodwin, who's even more interesting than I am, who's going to pick up from where I left off. Any other questions? You all have my email address. You have my Twitter. By the end of today, all of you who are using Twitter will be following me. Mike Nelson. I'm the only Mike Nelson on Twitter, just Mike Nelson. Do you have a question?
First of all, I would like to, if you can, mention your email once again because we couldn't take it.
Okay, it's M-N-E-L-S-O-N. This is M. Nelson. POBOX.com. So it's like post office box, POBOX.com. And I look forward to getting email from all of you, seeing you on LinkedIn, or following you on Twitter. I personally am addicted to Twitter. Over the next 5 days, you will see about 100 tweets from me, all the really important little things that I learned, all the short little bumper stickers. And that's the last thing I will leave you with. In addition to the vision that we talked about, you need the bumper sticker. Now, I don't know if do you have bumper stickers on your cars in Afghanistan and Iraq? Is it a slogan? Yeah, well, I talked about bumper stickers in Singapore, and they told me afterwards that they were illegal in Singapore. But the point is, that was Singapore. You need a slogan. You need 7 words that summarizes why the internet is so important for your country. And they have to be memorable, they have to be visual, they have to be emotional, and they have to be memorable. So everybody else will hear your bumper sticker and say, yeah. And they will repeat it, and they will repeat it, and they will repeat it. We did that with Vice President Gore. Back when I was working for him in 1988, he compared the internet to the freeway, the superhighway of the future. He used that, and he used that, and he used that for 10 years. I got so tired of hearing it. But everybody in America knew how important the highways were. And he made the comparison. And then he talked about the little girl in his hometown of Carthage, Tennessee. 1,000 people in this little village. And the little girl was, in 1988, was going to log on to the internet and access the digital Library of Congress. The biggest library in the world was going to be online. And he helped make that happen. So get a vision. Make it short, make it powerful, and share it with everybody in your country, and find at least one politician who will make that her cause or his cause, and you're halfway there. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I think you're going to have an amazing week here, and I hope I run into you in the different sessions. I'm doing a session on Friday about reinventing economics, so economics can help us explain the digital economy. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Joe, who will introduce our next speaker.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate you coming. Oh, stay, good. Because
I always learn from him.
And this will be a segue. Mike, welcome. This is Mike Godwin.
Hit this button. There we go.
All right. I didn't prepare a bio for you, but perhaps you could introduce yourself. We have here.
I'll give you my Twitter handle. Can we? Is someone writing overhead, doing the overhead?
Right here.
Yes. It's my Twitter handle is at SFMNE. There, you found it. See, that's me right there. It's top one.
Nelson is easier.
But it doesn't matter. You found me. I only had to give him 4 letters. That's me.
That's a scary picture.
Yeah, that's me on CNN, or C-SPAN actually, for that one. So who am I? Why am I here? This is a question that we all ask ourselves at some point or another. But let me just tell you a little bit about what I do and how it might be relevant to your experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan, and how it might be relevant to your experiences here at the Internet Governance Forum. I was one of the very first lawyers in the United States to work on Internet issues. I started working on Internet law and policy right out of law school in 1990. And the way I got hired to do that work right out of law school was that I was already active as a law student in publicizing what I saw as a student as emerging issues relating to not just the internet, which no one had in the United States really in 1990. Hardly anyone had internet in 1990. But it would seem to me very clear that the internet and related technologies, computers, and so on, had a very strong connection to fundamental human rights, to freedom of speech, certainly political speech, but also the kind of speech that is protected by the United Nations and by other nations that have to do with individual dignity and the individual need for self-expression. And I started writing about this before I graduated from law school. And in my hometown, there were many people, there were many students who were beginning to use computers not primarily to program, but to talk to one another, that were typing emails to one another, often on local systems. And there was a federal police team that came in and seized a whole bunch of computers from some of these students and some of these individuals in my hometown. And I started writing about it because in the United States, we are very proud of what we believe are strong constitutional protections of free speech and privacy. But when the police came and took people's computers away, they took their property, and they also had all of their emails and all of their private messages and all of their contact information. And people were already, even in 1990s, storing their entire lives on computers. So, and they were unable to get the computers back. So I started writing about this, and the next thing you know, I had communicated, I had been a journalist, so I communicated these searches and seizures to my colleagues who were working as reporters, and then it got to be national news, and it inspired the formation of an organization called the Electronic Frontier Foundation. It didn't even have that name then, and the people who founded that organization said, well, you know, now that we've started a new internet rights organization, we need to hire a new young lawyer. And they said, well, who seems to know this stuff? And they looked on the internet and they found me. So oddly, by my hobby of writing about this stuff, I ultimately got myself my first job as one of the first lawyers to specialize almost entirely in internet law and policy. But one of the things that became very clear, and by the way, there's a Wikipedia entry on me. All this stuff is sort of in there in the Wikipedia entry if you want to find out more about it. I don't want to talk about myself too much, but I will talk about what I found out, which is that some people thought that computer law or internet law was this one thing, just like real estate law or oil and gas law or international law. They thought it was just some topic area. But what was clear to me from the very beginning was that our use of these technologies affected all the rest of our lives. So maybe it affected your finances and your banking, maybe it affected how you stayed in contact with relatives in different cities, maybe it affected how you earned a living. One of the, you know, it was clear to me that this wasn't a little subset of what people were doing, but it was very quickly going to affect everybody else's lives in every other area. So this, what I think makes this relevant and continuing, it continues to be relevant in every country in the world, is that historically, when a nation has gone through conflict or when a nation is facing challenges in developing its economy or its infrastructure or its government, and certainly when it tries to transition to democracy or tries to make its democracy stronger, hardly anyone focused on computers. They didn't think computers were really that important. They thought computers were like Cadillacs. You know, they were like this expensive toy that rich people had. But it seemed clear to me, even 25 years ago, that first of all, these devices and these technologies were going to be used by everyone, not just a class of people, but necessary for everyone, and not just people in cities, but people in rural areas as well. And everywhere in the country, people would use these tools to find out all sorts of things, just as we do now. If we have a health problem, if I cough in the morning, I go look up on Google what my symptoms are and see if someone has an idea of what might be wrong with me. And I think a lot of people do something similar. So when you are a regulator in a country like Afghanistan, and by the way, I've worked on the draft IT policy in Afghanistan with a local partner, a policy advocate in Afghanistan. So I have a pretty clear idea of what's being looked at in Afghanistan. There's a tendency to say, for traditional governments and government officials to say, this is this extra thing that we will give to citizens or a problem that we will solve after we've solved health and food and peace and and our relations with our neighbors. And no, that is absolutely wrong. It turns out that these technologies, because at heart they are communications technologies, are kind of add a whole layer on top of every other problem that you ever deal with. So that if, for example, you have a country, you have a part of your country where you're not getting adequate access to water or to health care, having the digital information layer on top of that problem enables you to come up with solutions that people never were able to come up with before. And they're not always solutions that are driven by a minister or the ministry or the legislature or a president or anybody. Sometimes it's just people talking to one another. You need a plow? I have a plow. You know, you need a tractor? I have a tractor. You need to know who the best doctors are? I know who they are. Or you need to tell a doctor to come to your town. I know how to get in touch with them. So when you are thinking about making your democracy stronger, one of the things that's really important is that you empower every citizen, not just government officials, and not even just the press or civil society advocates or, you know, people working, you know, in nonprofit industries, but everybody. You empower everybody to help one another in the common enterprise of making your country stronger and solving problems and communicating with one another. So this comes back to the question of regulation and policy. How do you create an environment that takes advantage of these technologies that are not luxuries, they're not Cadillacs, but that are, in fact, in this century, central to solving the problems that we face in this century? And that is the problem. As I said, I've worked in particular with the draft IT policy in Afghanistan, but I know that Iraq faces similar policy challenges to create a framework that encourages these tools and making them available not just to government, but to every citizen so that citizens can help one another. And there are lots of ways to answer these questions, and they're not always the same answers. But I think that one thing that when you are transitioning to an environment in which you want to empower citizens to contribute to the health of the nation in this way, you have to open up the policy and regulation process in a way that maybe you never have before. You know, there are countries, old countries and new countries all around the world that still have no tradition of allowing real citizen input, even though the citizens actually know a lot about what the problems are and what the resources are and what needs to be solved and what should be done first. So what I've been doing over the last year and a half, and what I will be continuing to do for some time, is I've been working with local organizations in different countries to help them develop a process in which they have an ongoing relationship with government, with their government, and with other, and also that at the same time they're empowering ordinary citizens to be full participants in a democracy. And this is not always, it's not always clear how someone who wants to be either a regulator or someone who wants to influence regulation can proceed. You know, for one thing, and I'll just tell you, it's true for everyone, you have to overcome a certain reluctance just to get on the phone and call up a minister's office and say, I would like to come in and talk to you about a policy issue, because it's intimidating. It's intimidating for everyone. But what happens is, if you set out to create this kind of friendship with the government officials who really will only succeed if they succeed in helping you, what happens is that it becomes an ongoing friendship, an ongoing friendly relationship, where sometimes you are calling the government to tell them things that you can do for them because they need your help. Many people if you work as a regulator, some people just assume that you know everything. They just assume that you know everything about telecommunications, everything about internet, satellite communications. We have a geosynchronous satellite. Oh, great. Very exciting. But they don't necessarily, but of course
Everything.
And the internet does kind of know everything. You're trying to create are fragile or under threat. The problem is and I'll just tell you, it's human nature. The natural tendency when you're under threat and you're trying to keep your government together is to clamp down. If everybody would just stay home, that would be great. But in fact, they know about that they can share with you and with other citizens issues. I really want to stress this. Every country in the world do, because the internet and the immense power that individuals have. It's nothing like we've ever seen in the world before. But our experience has been that if you can accept that first discomfort of recognizing that everybody has this democratic power both to seek and impart information and to publish and to be fully participatory citizens in a democracy, your country gets stronger, your society gets stronger, and you're more likely to succeed in solving the problems that you need to solve. Once again, and I'll just stop here and take questions, I think, but once again, this comes, in order to get to that world, you have to put policies in place. And not all policies are going to lead to success. I'll give you some examples of policies that won't. If you give privileges to some foreign telecommunication companies to have rights of way or to have bandwidth for broadcasting or to build towers, to build mobile towers, but you don't give them an obligation to serve people in rural areas, they won't build out there. They'll just build in the cities where a lot of people are. Then they only have to build 1 or 2 towers and they're done. So you have to, if you do create incentives to encourage people to build telecommunications infrastructure in your country, you have to put obligations there too, because it's really important, and I think you all agree, that citizens in every part of your country, not just in the urban areas, feel connected to what's happening in the rest of the life of the country. And so you have to have policies in place to do that. And there's more than one way to get to that result, but it's something that a regulator has to think about. If you, in a country wholly unrelated to Iraq and Afghanistan and Myanmar, up until 2 years ago, every SIM card for a mobile device cost $1,000 US dollars. Amazingly, not many people had SIM cards. And the pricing was arbitrary. Nobody knew who set that price. It was the ministry, which was then a regulator, set the price, and it was a state-owned telecommunications company. Now they've let other companies in, and now a lot more people can buy SIM cards and mobile phones. I'll say just a little bit about mobile phones and then take some questions. In many nations, the way telecommunications and the internet have progressed have been built on wires in the ground, or wires on towers, or wires on posts. But if you're in a hurry to develop a communications infrastructure that engages your citizens, you're going to be promoting wireless use. That's just reality. It's the easiest thing to build in a hurry. And you have to create policies that enable companies to build those towers and enable people to use their mobiles. That's one. The second thing is that in another year or two, nobody will have anything but a smartphone. The idea that there's smartphones and other kinds of phones, no, they're all smartphones. Soon, and that'll be very soon, which means that everybody's carrying powerful computers around, and they're able to seek information and publish information really from anywhere that they can reach with their mobiles. And that's going to be hugely, it's going to be scary, but ultimately very positive. But you have to make sure that you get those tools and that freedom into every citizen's hands. So I spoke here without notes and without really preparation, and I didn't hear what you said before, but I hope this somehow plugs.
I just kept saying transparency, transparency, transparency.
I hope this plugs into what you've been hearing up to now, and I would love to answer any questions that you have. I'm very excited for you. I know some of the challenges are more scary than others right now, but I'm very excited for you because I think, in my work with citizens in Iraq and Afghanistan, I've been continually impressed with the commitment to exploring the potential for democracy and citizen engagement. It's been very exciting for me. Go ahead.
Well, thanks, Mike. I'm Amar from IWPR. I have a quick question. Do you guys at Internews have any modules or training material on ICT reporting? Basically reporting on ICT technologies.
Sorry, do we have any modules or training materials on ICT and?
ICT reporting or ICT development reporting, like for countries?
We do not as such. I would like us to develop that, but the program that I'm part of is relatively new to Internews. Internews, for those of you who don't know, the organization that I worked for until yesterday was my last day, but Internews historically has done media development, so they've helped people develop radio stations and newspapers, and they've trained journalists, and they've done some things that really are related to those functions. But ICT development, almost all the ICT development work that has been produced by Internews was produced by me, working with a team at NIE in Kabul. And what I would do is I would talk to NIE because I've actually, what NIE has been doing, I'd be happy to talk to you as well. I'll give you my contact information if there's something you want to follow up with. But what NIE has been trying to do has been to try to develop something like an IGF for Afghanistan. This is to different stakeholders. They talk to the companies, they talk to the telephone companies, and they talk to the internet service providers, and they talk to reporters and journalists, and they try to get consensus about what good policy looks like going forward and what ICT development looks like going forward. What I've read, what the government in Afghanistan commissioned was a report, like a 100-page report from an Indian consulting company where the Indians were trying to imagine what Afghanistan wanted, but really hadn't asked anybody. And so I read this thing, and I had lots and lots of comments on it. It wasn't I didn't think it was it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't gonna, I guess the goal, there's a position paper in Afghanistan, a 2020 position paper about what everything's supposed to look like in 2020, the Indians had clearly gotten a government contract to read that paper and write a set of recommendations to save the ministry the work of figuring out how to write recommendations on their own. But I think the Afghans can do better, and I'm willing to bet there are similar and parallel problems in Iraq. But I'll give you my card. I'll give everybody my card before I leave, so you'll be able to contact me if you have follow-up questions.
Has the Open Society Institute done anything that would be helpful there?
Well, I think the Open Society Institute, the Open Society Institutes, I think, are interested in the issue. So is the Ford Foundation, but I have not yet seen them give a lot of focus on developing policy as such. They typically are focused more on the fundamental rights protections, but as you know, Iraq and Afghanistan already have constitutions that have rights protections in them. So the question is not so much what the rights protections are, but how you implement policies that make sure those rights are useful, you know, to ordinary citizens as well as to the press and government. Go ahead.
May I introduce myself? My name is Hazem. I'm working for the Ministry of Communication. And you know, Iraq now have a big challenge with fighting ISIS, and there's a lot of Facebook pages that support ISIS and share their video for execution soldiers and so on. So in terms of law, if you know their idea for those creators, how to treat with this people?
Well, this is a great question. When you have an insurgency like ISIS, you know, does that mean that you have to strike some different kind of balance in terms of national security? And I have and feel free to disagree with me about this, because I have a view that's somewhat non-traditional on this. My view is that whenever ISIS and ISIS supporters are dumb enough to post something on a Facebook page, you ought to let them, because it's a source of intelligence. You know, if what happens is you worry that if they're showing scary images, or if they're saying scary things, it's disruptive, and you want to try to, I know. But when, you know, well, Facebook itself will remove some stuff as a matter of policy for Facebook. But I think that I think that when you have an insurgency as terrible as the ISIS insurgency is, then you want to gather as much information as you can, and you want to empower ordinary citizens who have smartphones with cameras, who may see somebody driving along in a personnel carrier and may be able to tell you where they saw people headed, or they may be able to tell you about a crime they saw committed. Those are all things that you want to open up the channels for, rather than, in the interest of keeping people calm, shutting down those channels. Now, that's my view, and I'm sympathetic with people who you know, say correctly that the images that ISIS wants to share and the messages they want to share are scary and frightening and potentially disruptive. But I think you are better off knowing more than you are by trying to create a silence in which people know less, but they're just as scared.
If I can add to that, it's not an opinion that only Mike has. I think the answer to these situations is more information. The idea that you're going to try to block information because it's unpleasant, or because it's hate speech, or because you don't like the politics of somebody, that's not nearly as effective as just flooding the internet with the opposite message. There's a great website called Web of Trust. This is it's in Finland, and this is a site where you can go and they actually have you can either type in the name of the website that you're interested in, or they have a plugin. And so your browser can tell you, this site is full of lies, or this site is a scam site, malware. I mean, it's a very useful way for individuals to find out what's behind a website. so they can decide for themselves if that information is true and useful. Encourage that kind of thing in your own country. Encourage it in your own language, because that's the answer. If you tell your citizens, we're going to protect you from information that we don't think you should see, that just feeds the conspiracy. That just feeds the mistrust. It makes it easier for ISIS or some other group to say, well, we're right, and the government doesn't want you to know that we're right. So instead, let them look and let them show how stupid they are. Let them show how violent they are.
Yeah,
and tell a better story yourself.
And also, I mean, I think that, if you have, every citizen is potentially a reporter in terms of when they are feeding into the policy process. But my view is that over time, if you create a policy process in which you have developed relationships that are long-lasting and that have a degree of trust, even the self-interested companies will start to be more helpful and not merely serving their own interests, but actually providing helpful information and information-sharing partnerships. And there's a reason for this. Now, it's very, very simple. If you're constantly just serving your own self-interest, there's no reason a regulator should ever listen to you. But if you are knowledgeable about technology or implementing or building infrastructure or providing services, and you know that a policy goal is better reached one way than another, you can at least have that discussion with the regulator. But the only way you can have it and have your words and experience and knowledge get any credit is if you can be trusted to be honest and not always tilting the facts to favor you. And what happens is an evolutionary process as you build this policy process in which not only do the regulators continually get smarter and more sophisticated and able to ask subtler questions, and they're able to be appropriately skeptical, but also the stakeholders, which may be companies or they may be somebody else, see that it actually serves their self-interest most if they are simply as honest and as forthcoming as they can be. It's not ideal, it doesn't always work, but in order for you to get to that point, you have to open enough doors for a policy process to have these many kinds of dialogues between stakeholders and government policymakers.
So Mike, I don't want to put you on the spot, but perhaps we might see you again throughout the week.
I will be here all week.
So if you have your colleagues, if there are more questions from our folks, maybe we could carry on this discussion.
If you see me, feel free to come talk to me. You are invited now to come talk to me at any time. You will also meet my former colleague who's now with the Department of State, Laura Motaz. She's also going to be here all week, and she's very approachable. She'll be here at 1 o'clock, I think.
1 o'clock, right?
So I think that what you should do is anybody who's come here to talk to you is ready to talk to you. So if you either didn't have a chance to talk to me about an issue while I was here, or if you think of something later, I want you to feel that you are personally invited by me to come up and ask me whatever it is you want to talk to me about. Thank you.
Thank you again for coming. Very interesting discussion. So I'm glad we had a lot of questions, but we'll move right into our next speaker. I'm very honored that we have as our next speaker, Mr. Christopher Painter, who is the coordinator for cyber issues at the United States Department of State. In that capacity, he works on a number of cyber issues, including cybersecurity. So with that very brief introduction, Chris, we brought up, using the technology, Chris's biography, and we'll let him take it away. It's yours until the coffee break.
Perfect. Well, thanks. It's an honor to be here again. I'm not sure there's anyone whose face is the same from a couple of years ago in Baku when I taught this group. Yes, so one or two, so that's good. And I thought what I'd do is I want to make this as interactive as possible, but I want to cover a couple of things. First, just some of our policies in this area and how we try to integrate all of these different things, what we mean when we talk about cyber issues, and how we're taking this forward as both a national level issue and also as an international issue. And then second, I'll drill down a little deeper into some of the cybersecurity issues, only because you have many other people who are talking about a lot of the other aspects that I also cover. So one thing that we found as we're making policy, both domestically and as we think about this internationally, is that, and I think many of you have probably seen this in your own lives before, in your own work before, that because a lot of senior policymakers think that these issues, whether they be governance issues or internet freedom issues or regulatory issues or cybersecurity issues or or cybercrime issues, often the senior decision makers would turn off their brains as soon as they heard cyber, because they thought, well, it's very technical, it's very complicated. You go all and do that and tell me how it's going, basically without actually digging deeply into it. And it's important to have the people who understand the technology involved, and all of us understand the technology well. But if you don't have the buy-in and understanding of the senior policymakers, there's only so much you can do. And to be frank, even though it's good to have some technological grounding in your policies, to be sure, these are major issues of social policy, of economic policy, and national security policy. So this is the same kinds of policies that the upper reaches of all of our governments deal with all the time. And they need to be more involved. And I'd say in the US over the past 5 years or so, there's been a transition, so it's much more of a policy issue. Before I was at the State Department, my background is I was at the Justice Department. I was a prosecutor at one point that did cyber crime cases in the 90s. I then ran the computer crime section of our Justice Department. I was at our FBI for a short time as a Deputy Assistant Director. And I moved there to the White House when President Obama took office for 2 years, helping craft our international strategy for cyberspace, our cyberspace policy review, and then moved over to the State Department to create this new office working for Secretary then Clinton and now Kerry that tries to meld all these issues together. So in terms of the cross-pollination of these issues, we did this international strategy when I was at the White House after we did our own domestic search of what we were doing. And we had several buckets of activity, including human rights online, including internet freedom issues, economic issues in internet governance, issues around cybercrime, cybersecurity, and then international security, which is cyber conflict, cyber weapons, designing confidence building measures and transparency measures between countries, applying international law in cyberspace, existing international law, and then capacity building, what we can do to bring states up to speed in all these different areas. And we put out an international strategy that said that our long-term goal was an open, interoperable, secure, and reliable information and communications infrastructure. And not just one or the other, we could have all of those different things together. And as we think about our policies, we need to do that. The other thing we did, which I will tell you is a challenge, and I'm sure you've also seen this in your own countries, is that we became much better as a government in coordinating among ourselves. So, lots of different agencies within our government have responsibility for some aspects of this. Lots of different parts of my own department, the State Department, have responsibility for this. And so bringing all those partners together and making sure they understood what our ultimate goal was and how they plugged in was important. And for us, that includes, on the security side, our Department of Homeland Security, our Justice Department, our Department of Defense, our Department of Commerce on the economic side, our Department of Treasury, the White House, where we have a coordination role now, our State Department, even our education and other department, and have all of them talking together, because different people go to different forums and different people have different aspects of this issue. A good example, because many of you who are in the government are from communications ministries. Communication ministries have an important part of this, but they don't have the entire space. They don't have all the cybersecurity space. They don't have all the policy space. And many countries' foreign ministries weren't even paying attention to this, so getting them all to pay attention was important. So we're much better now as coordinating as a government. We have constant coordination meetings that the White House holds. I hold meetings in the State Department on coordinating some of our international issues. And so when some of us, and we have a large delegation here at the IGF, and I welcome, as we said at the end of the last talk, people coming up and talking to me, or Liesl Franz, who's one of my senior advisors over there, or our Undersecretary, Kathy Novelli, is coming, and we have senior commerce people and regulators here. So please take the opportunity to talk to them during the week. But having that syncing up of where our policies are and what we're trying to do has been important because, you know, if you send a communications ministry person to, say, the ITU, all these forums are not just dealing with narrow issues anymore. They're dealing with everything. And so we have to be prepared to discuss everything. So this idea of making sure that we coordinate, and the overlaps are important too, because when you're talking about cybersecurity, for instance, it's not just about cybersecurity. You have to implement cybersecurity in such a way that you're protecting your networks and you're building cooperation with other countries, but at the same time you're respecting human rights and making sure that there's an open internet and not a fragmented internet. So you can't use cybersecurity as a proxy for restricting the open internet because then you hurt yourself socially and economically. So you have to think about these things together. And that's been very important as we develop our policy. On cybersecurity, I wanted to say a couple of things. One is, you know, we've been pursuing this for quite some time, you know, there's a lot of work to be done in cybersecurity, and there's a couple building blocks. One is at a national level, and one of the things we promote is that every country should have a national strategy to deal with cybersecurity. The value of a national strategy is it, again, raises the level of understanding and importance to the senior levels of governments. It also helps define the roles and responsibilities of different departments within government. And importantly, it also helps engage the private sector and civil society within your country. So when we were doing our international strategy, for instance, I had dozens of consultation sessions with civil society, with the private sector, and of course with our own government. So that was very important, and having that national strategy elevates that. Two is to have institutions in place that are important. So having, for instance, a national CERT, or Computer Emergency Response Team, is important. And not every country has that, but that's a key part of cooperating. And having good cybercrime laws is important, again, to have good cooperation and make sure you have this international cooperation. Three is to have a way of coordinating all these different agencies, whether it be at the prime minister level or the president level or a particular department who's making sure that everyone's talking to each other. That's very important too. And we call that cybersecurity due diligence, things that you can do to do that. We also have been thinking about how we make sure that not just the government but the private sector is more secure. And there's been a major development in the US over the past year. President Obama signed an executive order about the security of our networks, both private sector networks and government networks. And a part of our Commerce Department, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, NIST, was given the task of coordinating with industry, other governments, other stakeholders to come up with a framework, a cybersecurity framework. And they just released this a couple of months ago now. That is a collection of best practices, not one size fits all, because different industries and different critical infrastructure have different needs, but really was built as a collaborative endeavor with the private sector and other stakeholders. And so this is a framework that, again, it's come out with. I recommend it all to you. We can give you links to that so you can take a look at it. And it's a good thing as you're thinking about how you make sure you have better security in your own country, how you might go about that. You know, and it's not a prescriptive method. It's not something that says we're going to regulate all of this stuff that has this happen, because we've learned that that hasn't worked very well, because it's hard to figure out what the regulation is going to be with the fast-moving technology. But it sets sort of standards that I think help drive a better standard of care within the various critical industries and the government, and helps that work. So that's been a major initiative recently. We've also been working in the area of international security to try to make sure we have a stable international environment. And there, the two key things is to make sure that international law like the UN Charter apply in cyberspace. Now, how it applies, we're not exactly sure yet, but these are things like proportionality and distinction that have dealt with conflicts from the beginning of time, since the 40s, so not beginning of time, but for a long time.
That's the beginning of time.
And they've been very good at keeping a lot of the world order. Having this apply in cyberspace is important. So it's not just this lawless space, there are some rules around. But also trying to build confidence between countries who may not trust each other. Things like transparency measures and cooperative measures. And ultimately stability measures. So we've been working through that. We've been working in regional forums in Europe, the Organization for Security and Cooperation of Europe. We did 11 of these CBMs that got announced at the ministerial in Kiev last December. So we're pursuing that line too. And then the third thing we've been trying to do from my perspective is we've been engaging governments more and more in discussions about this whole range of topics. And we try to bring as many of the government agencies on our side and the other side together so that we have that integrated approach, and that's been useful. So I wanted to stop there so we can make this interactive. I'm happy to talk about anything that we do, and there's been quite a bit. My office now has existed for 3 years. So when I first talked to you in Baku, we're only like about 1 year old, so we're growing, we're doing a lot more. It does seem like there's an endless amount of work in this area, so that's good and bad. And I'm also very happy to be here again. The Internet Governance Forum, I think, is really a great platform for discussion about all these issues. And also, I participated in the Net Mundial meeting in Brazil, and I'd have to say that we're at an inflection point of a lot of these issues. And I think it's important for us to maintain this multi-stakeholder approach to policymaking in the Internet, particularly around Internet governance issues. And I was very pleased that the Brazil conference endorsed that. And it's important to make sure that stakeholders have a chance to work on these issues, because I can tell you from the government's perspective that we're never better than we have the other stakeholders involved. I never think that I know all the answers. I seldom know all the answers, and so having the other communities work with us on these issues has been incredibly helpful, and it's really been helpful in my entire career. So I think that's important. There are forces who would like to have a more simply governmental approach and not involve other stakeholders. I think that's a mistake for lots of reasons. So I think we need to work to make sure that happens while strengthening our security and strengthening the penetration of these networks so more people have access to them. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I think we're in a good place right now. So with that, let me open it up for questions.
Hi, my name is Hazem. I'm working for the Ministry of Communication of Iraq. My question is about the cyber crime in the United States. I mean, there is a cyber crime center for each United States, or each ministry, they have their own cyber crime team, so they can handle the incident if it happens, or it's treated with the cyber crime center.
So there's a couple different aspects. There's, for technical incidents, we have, for the government, we have US CERT, who handles the technical part of the incidents and works with each of our agencies. And the states, each of the states have their own CERTs too, and they work together. So that's part of it, and they work closely with law enforcement for cyber crime issues. And so some of these intrusions attacks are cyber crime too. I mean, many of them are. So there has to be a close link between those technical agencies and also the law enforcement agencies, and they're discussing back and forth and sharing information. And we do that well now. Not always, but now we do it well. And there's several different cyber crime apparati in the US. So you have the FBI, who has a cybercrime division at headquarters, but also has cybercrime agents in each of their field offices around the country. You have the Secret Service, who focuses largely on financial crime, but does other cyber crimes as well. You have our ICE. We have a number of federal agencies who work in the cybercrime area, and they increasingly work very well together. And so that's been one of the big efforts of the last few years, is to make sure that that's coordinated. And then the states have their own cybercrime capability, and some are better than others, some are stronger than others in this. But we also have some ways of pooling resources for fraud in other cases where you have information coming in from what look like small cases, and they aggregate them and they turn out to be big cases. And so that's the National White Collar Crime Center is an example of that works well. And then what we've done is we've built a way to try to coordinate with other countries more quickly. So there's relationships where there's maybe an FBI, LEGAT in different countries, but we've also have this thing called the 24/7 network that used to be, it started with the G8, but now it's 60 countries, that is a way to do a fast cooperation to at least freeze evidence, because evidence can move very quickly, around the world working with other countries. And so that's something that network is continuously expanding. It's something that we're promoting very much. We've been a member of it from the beginning. More and more countries joined. If your country is not a member of that, I think it's something that's worthwhile. And I would suggest you do that. I can put you in touch with the right people at our Department of Justice from our standpoint. And so that's good. Now, because so many people and different agencies are dealing with cybercrime, sometimes there are coordination issues, I won't lie to you, but it's gotten much better because there's so much out there that we need to fight. And it's so important for us to be effective in going after these cases that if we don't do it, I think it undermines the stability of the internet. So we have to be strong in making sure we meet these threats. Others? Yeah.
Quick question regarding the 24/7 network. Are there certain criteria for the countries that are willing to join?
Well, the essential criteria is that they have to actually be able to be part of the network. In other words, they have to be able to be reached 24/7 if another country wants to reach them. They have to have a contact way to do that. And they have to have capabilities. So if a country has no cybercrime law and has no cybercrime enforcers, well, it doesn't really make sense to be part of the network because you can't do anything, right? So, but increasingly countries are getting stronger in terms of their law and capabilities. So it really is having those capabilities. There's a list of some of the requirements. Again, we can make sure that we distribute that to this group so you know what it is.
Chris, just in way of setting, in terms of cybersecurity for each of the countries represented here, in Iraq, there has been a lot of work on a national strategy for cybersecurity. Right. Hazem, who I think you're the only person who heard Mr. Painter speak about
2 years ago, I remember.
2 years ago, a returnee, but he participated in a working group.
Oh, great. Good.
And there have been further discussions. I hope we can continue those going forward in terms of Iraq. And there's, I think you did pass, was there cyber crime legislation was in fact passed? Did not pass. Okay. It's been debated a bit. You have more on that.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Painter. I'm Ara Shabander from the Institute for War and Peace Supporting IWPR. You guys are funding us to do some ICT projects and communication security projects with activists in the MENA region. The Iraqi cybercrimes law was actually withdrawn from the parliament because it was so bad. And now it's being rewritten. Part of that work is being done by us. Again, State Department is funding us to assist Iraqi institutions to write the new cybercrimes law. The latest draft has reached a very advanced stage, I have to say. I think this new government will probably try to pass it at some point, but it's not there yet.
It's important to have that because certainly when I was at the Justice Department, there were cases where countries did not have good laws, and it was hard because the hackers and others take advantage of that. So they'll route their attacks through countries where the laws aren't very good because then it's harder to find them. So it's important to have that both for your own domestic purposes, but also in terms of others who might use your connectivity. So it's important. So that's good. And as I said, as you look at those issues, none of these issues are in isolation. So even when we're doing our cybercrime law, we're very careful to make sure we balance privacy concerns and free flow of information and make sure that they're very tailored as we go about it. So that's important too.
And then I was just going to say, our Afghan participants also are working on cybersecurity. In that case, there is a draft ICT law, which currently covers a number of issues, including electronic transactions, e-signature, privacy, cybercrime. Just a couple of weeks ago, the chairman of the commission, the four representatives we have today are from the Regulatory Commission, ATRA. The chairman of the commission was one of a number of officials who met in Estonia to talk about the draft law and the cybercrime provisions. And they hope to have, you might be following this, I don't know if you all are working directly on this, but they actually hope to have a draft cybercrime or cybersecurity law in place, a draft to talk about in the next 2 months or so. And then also, they too have worked on a national strategy, and I think there's been progress, is what I've heard from the Ministry of Communications and Information Technology, which is not represented today. So I don't know if you have more information to share or have any questions for Mr. Painter.
I have a question that in some of the countries, they're keeping restriction on internet freedoms. Like they are keeping restriction on Facebook and also keeping in YouTube. And what's your opinion about?
So, I mean, we're very committed to the free expression and free speech online. And there was a declaration that came out of the UN Human Rights Commission just about 2 years ago now that said you have the same rights online as you do offline. You know, the idea of trying to restrict content and restrict things like Facebook and YouTube in a more global way doesn't make any sense to us. You know, there's targeted things you can do to deal with specific threats, and you can work with those companies and others to try to deal with specific criminal threats. But, you know, our sense is blocking information because you're afraid of what the information says is never the right way to go, that there's a much better way to go and a more tailored way to go. And you know, and ultimately, I think you know, there's two things about having an open internet that are important. One is the social good of having people be able to talk to each other and express their ideas, but the other is the economic good. You know, I think it's true that you are better off economically as a country with an open internet than a closed internet. And I think there's been some studies that have been done recently that have pointed that out. There was one that just came out about 6 months ago. So the more you try to restrict these various channels, I think the harder it is for it to be a robust platform for economic development, which is a real key concern for every country. So again, we think those policies have to be very, very carefully drawn and done very carefully. You really do have to, when you think about these security aspects, not just look at security, but look at the effect it's having in a broader sense.
More questions?
Or do you all want coffee?
I think we're waiting for the coffee tea. Before we break, and thank you for your time, I just would like to ask if you had any practical suggestions on where our participants might want to decipher. We have a always complex agenda. I'm looking for this. This is just the subset of possible workshops to go. Anything you can suggest that they go to? Or?
There's a lot of different things. I guess I'm doing a workshop on cybercrime. When, Liesl? Thursday morning.
Be a really good
so that's
one, I think. It's supposed to deal with practical suggestions for developing countries on various aspects of cybercrime prevention. So it might be one good one, but there's probably several others.
There's lots of really, as you know, there's a wealth of things. Yeah. So you're welcome to attend that, and if I think of others, I'll let you know too, because we're doing the same thing. There's so much every year to find. You can't do everything, but you want to.
That's great. Well, if there are no more questions, I want to thank you for coming. Sure. Thank you for your time. Hope to see you around during the week.
Yep, absolutely.
We will now take our coffee and tea break. We're behind on the agenda, but I think we may not have our next speaker up, so we'll have a little extra time. So if we want to plan for about 20-minute break, and we can convene back here about 11:15 or so, even later. All right, thank you.
مارسن هسه بالطيارة هيطلع الطيارة هسه؟ تكتيكال تيست بعد السويد ايه راح يطلع هسه جاب باور ملي
Ortalama 13 kişi. Teknik hariç ve biz hariç.
ما ادري كيف ما بالنسبه لي شاب 6 ونص غير اللي مخالفات ومخالفات وين مخالفات؟ عنوان الفيلم اسمه صوفا هوتيل قريب من هنا هذا أنا صورة يجوز نحضر له بس ركبوا سعر أو نفتح لاين منا اثنين بس أنت متأكد نشيل أغراضنا؟ ممكن معفوة شو؟ أنا جمعت قرابة بس شو
So we all here? You ready to start? I don't see... 1, 2, 3, 4. We're only missing Kasim, right? Five, 6, 1, 2. Most people are here. So we'll start. Hope you enjoyed the morning discussions. It seemed like there was a lot of interest in Mike Nelson and Mike Godwin and their discussions. So you know what? We have an opportunity to visit with Mike some more. And I really appreciate this. Mike said he had some slides, some more information. So we thought we would continue that discussion with those slides for the next about a half hour or so. Much time. So if we're willing with you, let's start.
What I thought I'd do is give you a short summary of one of the classes that I teach at Georgetown. It's entitled What's Shaping the Internet? My students pay about $8,000 for this course. You're going to get it for free. And you don't have to do any of the writing or any of the term papers or any of the presentations. But I'm going to just quickly go through some of the key points of the class and give you a sense of how we approach things, and you might find it helpful. The class is taught as a series of case studies. So each week we look at 2 different important internet issues. This is a list of some of the case studies that we've looked at. So it's about censorship, it's about the Internet Governance Forum, it's about privacy, copyright, domain names, authentication, cybersecurity. The students have a chance to look at a lot of different issues. But the reason I wanted to share these slides is just to give you a sense of why this is so exciting right now. You know, we're right in the middle of something that's as important as the creation of the World Wide Web. And as a result, we really need new approaches to policy. It's not good enough to pretend that the internet is a telephone because Skype looks like a telephone. We need to really think about doing things differently. In a lot of countries, they've tried to adopt the old broadcasting regulations or telephone regulations to the internet. That just does not work. The internet's much more powerful. It's much less limited. A lot of the justification for the old regulations just doesn't apply. So, as you know, we've had a series of very important UN meetings. A few years ago, we had the World Conference on International Communications. We're having the IGF. We've had the Net Mundial meeting in Brazil. The European Union's in the middle of major rewrites of their data protection and telecom laws. So we've got about 2 or 3 years here where really important decisions are being made, and your countries are making those decisions as well. So what's new, and we talked about a little bit of this already, we're moving from having a billion PCs and laptops to having 5 billion smartphones and cell phones, and eventually hundreds of billions and trillions of devices. We're moving from just sharing data to actually building a global supercomputer called the cloud. And we're not just communicating one-to-one or broadcasting one-to-many. We're having these incredible discussions where dozens of people are talking to dozens of people. We're building this many-to-many medium, which is, again, fundamentally different than anything we've ever built before. And we're making it wireless so that we can communicate in every corner of the world. The other really exciting thing is this last point, which is that we have open standards. We have a lot of free technology that's allowing entrepreneurs, even 15-year-old kids, to create companies that provide service to millions of people for almost no money, because they can build on top of Facebook or Google Apps or some cloud service that they pay just a few $1,000s for. So the questions we examine in our class is who controls the evolution of the internet, how do they try to control it, and why does the internet change the game? The way I think about it in class is you really have to look at the entire global internet society, the information society, whatever you want to call it, it's not just about telecom networks, which is just one of the 6 layers. First of all, of course, you need the rule of law. You have to fight corruption, you need contracts, you need to know that when somebody signs a contract, it will be enforced. You have to have telecom networks, and a lot of you are working on that. The internet is built upon that, but the internet's no good if people can't buy computer hardware and cell phones. Hardware is no good if you don't have good content, preferably in the language that people use. And then you need the training and education. So we need all those things. Some of you are working on several of these layers, and I know that your countries are working on all 6 pieces of this. When you look at the internet society and what's developing, it's not just telecom companies, it's not just governments, it's not just Microsoft and IBM and Intel and Cisco. It's really about everybody. Everybody controls the internet. Everybody controls what we do with it. And at the same time, nobody controls it, because nobody can turn it off. It's not like the old telephone networks where somebody could pull the plug. There are so many different connections, so many different services. So the exciting thing is that everyone controls it, and the exciting thing is that no one controls it. Of course, for a lot of governments, that last part is very scary as well. But that's the way we should think about it. We've built a medium that everyone controls and no one controls. It's a lot like paper. You know, nobody controls who can use paper or what you can write on it. And that's the way I think about the internet. It's as flexible and universal and adaptable as paper. Just a few countries in the world try to control who gets paper, but most of us don't. It's just too useful, too powerful. So this is really why I wanted to show these slides. This is the way we used to regulate telephone networks. I call this phone governance. Back in the old days, you had the International Telecommunications Union in Geneva, and they were the coordination mechanism. They brought together all of the governments who controlled their telephone networks. They either ran the telephone networks or they controlled them. Most of these countries had a monopoly phone company, one phone company, and they all worked together to share traffic, and that's how it all worked. And at the bottom, you had what were called subscribers. We called them subscribers because it was like a magazine subscription. You either had a telephone or you didn't. And you didn't have a lot of say as to what the telephone could do. In America, until 1960, you couldn't even decide that you wanted a different color of telephone. You had a black telephone, and that was it. Luckily, in the 60s, they started making provisions. Yeah, you could have other colors and other shapes. But this is the old paradigm. This is bottom, top down. Users have very little flexibility, and the governments and the phone companies made all the decisions. And they coordinated through one organization in Geneva. With the internet, governance is totally flipped. Totally flipped. Rather than the ITU in Geneva, we have dozens of different groups that are making decisions about the internet. Hundreds of different governments and different groups are working together to influence those decisions, but the real choices are being provided by thousands of different people developing websites, browsers, routers. There's just this incredible competition and innovation. So the choices are provided by the IT companies and entrepreneurs and individuals. But the decisions about which choice succeeds are made by hundreds of millions of internet users, billions of them even. Because every day people are deciding what website to go to, what browser to use. So we've flipped the whole picture. We've put users in charge of the internet. And that's really exciting. But again, very uncomfortable for a lot of telecom regulators who like the old model that we had 40 years ago. But that's the way it works for paper. Paper works pretty well. That's the way it works for the internet so far, and that's the way I hope it will continue to work. Any questions about my five-minute lecture on internet governance? I mean, again, this is a radically different way of doing things. We've never had a communications medium that was controlled by the users, and I hope we continue to have it. To do that, we have to have coordination, we have to have some standards, but most of all, we have to have choices, and we have to have governments that encourage choices and encourage users to make choices. And we need governments that don't just make regulation. Some of the most successful things that governments have done have not, with regard to the internet, has not been regulation. It's been funding research, it's been training people on how to use the technology, and probably the most important thing that governments have done over the last 25 years is to spend their own money buying exciting new internet technology. The reason we have the internet today is because the US government in the 1980s decided they were going to use the internet, and they spent tens of millions of dollars, which back then made a big difference. They spent tens of millions of dollars buying internet service, and that convinced people that the internet was real and that it was useful, and it got everybody on the internet. Likewise, when your countries start using a new application, when you start using social media, when you start using e-payments or new online authentication technology, you can spur the market. You can be an early adopter. You can show the way. And that can bring people together and help spur the growth of these technologies in your country. The cloud is the same thing. 3 years ago, I was part of a special industry coalition that wrote a very important report called the Cloud 2 report, and it outlined what governments can do, what the US government could do to foster the use of cloud technologies. And the most important thing we said was the US government could be an early adopter. They could be a smart user of cloud technology, and that would inspire everyone else to come along and start using it as well. So that's sort of what I wanted to share of these slides. I have another 70 slides, which I won't share, but this is just to reiterate what I said. There's lots of different things government can do. Policy is important, but standards, business practices, and again, this last point, cultural context. That goes back to what I said earlier. Having a vision, sharing with people how this technology can make life better for the average citizen. That's all important. Okay, I hope that's provocative. Mostly I want to hear your questions, and again, we can go back and explore any of these slides or talk about anything else you like.
I have a very specific question. Telecom companies in Europe have started blocking both VPN and certain websites such as Pirate Bay, right? How does the US look at this? I mean, does it fall under the Second Amendment? I mean, are there other regulations in place?
Well, there's two questions there. Clearly, websites that have illegal content, things like child pornography, would be blocked by the ISPs because that's evidence of a crime. I mean, it's not an online crime, it's an offline crime, and they're using the internet to document that offline crime, and you know, that's a criminal activity. That's very different. Blocking voice over IP and blocking Skype is something which in the United States would be considered illegal. And the Federal Communications Commission has pressured companies that try to block certain types of applications, of legal applications. We're still in the middle of a big debate about net neutrality, which you've heard about. This is a very fuzzy phrase. At one end, there are 5 different definitions, at least. The most extreme definition, or the easiest definition, is net neutrality means you can't block websites. And almost everybody agrees that that's the case. You know, that the internet would be better if all applications, all legal applications, were allowed. We do have companies and countries in Europe that are blocking legal applications like Skype. When I was at Microsoft, we were pressuring governments in Europe to take action and stop that, because that limits choice, makes people pay more money for less service. Countries are moving in that direction. They're moving towards more competition and less blocking. The second question about what do you do about illegal use of copyrighted material is again, that's a tough one, because you do have companies basically making money off of somebody else's content. In general, it's proven to be very difficult or impossible to block all of the websites like Pirate Bay. And the content creators have slowly realized that the way to win is to provide the content some other way, a legal way that would make them some money and would dramatically reduce the demand for illegal websites. And that's working. That's been working very well for at least 5 years. So the problem is not all the content that people would be willing to pay for is available online yet. So there will be this market for illegal pirate sites. But the balance we have in the US is about right, which is you don't have to get permission to put something online, but if you are providing illegal copyrighted material, you can be challenged by the owner of the content, who can go to the ISP and ask that that content be taken down, and it will be taken down. And then there's an appeals process too, so that if you say, well, wait a minute, I actually have permission to share this copyrighted material, you can get it, you know, the decision can be reversed. But that's a much better situation than having to ask permission before you post something. It's called notice and takedown is the approach. Some people say it's the most important law that the U.S. ever passed on on the internet. It's called Section 230, very famous, from 1996 actually. Oh, 1998, excuse me. And that has been our balance. You know, you can post what you want, but someone has the right to challenge and say, wait a minute, that's not legal, and then take it down. And this happens tens of thousands of times a year in the U.S. alone, because there's a lot of misuse of content. Has that been an issue in Iraq already? I mean, the copyright issue?
Well, we are working on a policy paper on copyright, and as you can imagine, it's a heated debate. There are different opinions. The Ministry of Trade has a copyright section, so does the Ministry of Culture. And Iraqi government is trying to implement international standards in terms of copyright and registration and other issues. So it has been an issue, and I think it will continue to be so for the. Yeah.
Well, I would urge you to use the U.S. model, which has come up with a pretty balanced approach, and not the French model or the Spanish model. They had something called 3 strikes and you're out. It was one of the case studies that we looked at, and where if the ISP detects that you've posted illegal content 3 times, they will unplug you from the internet and refuse to give you internet service. In some cases, what was happening was somebody's Wi-Fi network wasn't secure, and the neighbor had a 12-year-old kid who was using the Wi-Fi to steal content. And, you know, here was somebody who needed the internet to do their job at home, or an 82-year-old grandmother who wanted to use Skype to talk to her grandchildren, and she was being unplugged because of what some kid was doing. And so that goes too far. So there has to be a good balance. But these are not easy issues. And in each of these case studies, I had 4 students do the case study, and we would have a debate, 2 on 2. One case, it was, you know, the copyright owners versus Facebook and YouTube, and, you know, going back and forth, arguing with one side or the other, and it was fun to see the students engage. We did the same thing on censorship, and I urge you, as you do these debates, as you debate these issues, set up panels like that. You know, don't set up a panel where, you know, 7 people from the copyright industry all stand up and say, you know, do this, and then the next day 7 people from the creative, you know, from the information wants to be free community all says the same thing. Get them all on the same panel and have a good fight, and let them have an hour and a half. You know, don't just. In Congress, in the U.S. Congress, we used to have hearings, and everybody would get 5 minutes, and then, you know, and often that was all. Just, you know, 6 people, 5, 5, 5, you know, done. You need to get into detail. You need to do what you're doing right now, which is give a case study and really explore it and say, okay, how could the law work? I would say there is a continuing debate in our country right now. Some of the law enforcement officials in our state governments would like to pressure the internet service providers and the internet companies to take more responsibility and be liable for everything their customers do. This is impossible, but they still want to hold those people liable. And if that happens, then that's the end of startups, it's the end of permissionless innovation. It would be great for internet lawyers. It would be terrible for the internet. So be careful when it comes to we call it the L word, liability.
That's actually what the Iraqi government tried to do in the previous cybercrimes law. There were provisions in that law that made not only the ISP, but actually the software developers. So let's say if you're Microsoft and you're selling someone, let's say, software to create a website, and then someone uses it, right, to put up an ISIS website, then Microsoft will be liable.
Well, what's really scary is that also means that nonprofit groups like Wikipedia or, you know, WordPress, I mean, there's a lot of open source technology, Firefox, these are technologies that were more or less given to the community, and they're sustained often with volunteer effort. There's no way that those organizations could be sued, and, you know, they'd have to close down, and all this wonderful technology would disappear. So I'm glad that you were able to push back against that, because it's not the way to make it work. I would say, I mean, an interesting model is cybersecurity. We've been debating in the United States about what to do to make the internet more secure. And the approach of many regulators is, okay, we'll figure out the best thing that everyone should do to make their network secure. And so there's all this effort to have government-imposed cybersecurity standards. It turns out the most useful thing that the government has done on cybersecurity in the last 10 years was very simple. First, a number of states, like California, and then the federal government, passed laws that said, if you have a cybersecurity incident, if some of your data is stolen and posted on the internet, if credit card numbers or birth dates are stolen and made available, then you have to tell your customers what has happened. You have to reveal the extent and the impact of the crime, of the attack. That motivated every CEO, every chief financial officer, every chief security officer to be a lot more serious about cybersecurity. The government didn't have to tell them what to do, but the government, by passing this law, put new pressure on them to secure their data. Because now there was a real expense. If there was an attack that was successful, they had to spend millions of dollars in some cases notifying their customers, answering their questions on the telephone, in some cases paying for them to get a new credit card because their credit card number was stolen. That added up to a lot of money. And so suddenly it became very, very logical to spend more money on cybersecurity. And so that's the kind of good policy, smart policy that you guys can design. You guys can look around the world and see all the things that other countries have done right and done wrong. And this is a good example, I think, where the US government didn't tell people what to do. We just gave them motivation to do more to reach the goal. And they could find different ways to reach the goal, which was more secure internet, more secure IT systems. And they have. It's worked. Other questions? Any questions from Afghanistan? I mean, you guys have a somewhat different situation, but you've done amazing things. I mean, I followed what's happened in Afghanistan with cell phones. It's absolutely incredible.
Actually, in terms of internet and control, we are satisfied. People are satisfied from the services, and there is no much control and censorship. Only some few type of websites that's according to the cultural context. So we don't have any serious problem.
So what kind of problems do you have?
Still, you know, the social websites sometimes, due to political things, sometimes they want to suspend or block. Recently, during the elections, when there was too much challenges, they decided to close the Facebook and Twitter, these sites. But again, the pressure from the civil society and these people denied the government. But comparing to our neighboring countries, we are much better.
Yeah. Well, you know the story here in Turkey. There's been a number of interesting case studies in Turkey. In the middle of their election a few months ago, they suspended Twitter. The day they suspended Twitter, 3 times more Twitter messages were sent in Turkey than ever before, because people found ways to work around all of the blocking. People were spray painting on the wall. People, to log on to Twitter, type. they had proxy server numbers on the wall as graffiti. It was very successful.
I have a short comment about the copyright, because there's a famous website like Torrent Media File. They upload a lot of movies or program which cost $100 for free. So who's responsible to suspend this website and why it's still open? I download a lot of.
Yeah, the problem, well, again, with torrent, I mean, the vast majority of material on torrent is legal. A lot of it is free software that's being shared, or it's free content that people are sharing. There is this procedure where if BitTorrent has material that is clearly copyrighted and should not be on BitTorrent, that they're challenged and they take it down. But when you have millions of users, people posting 100 things a day, it's hard to keep ahead of it. But there's always going to be leakage. But as long as people have a legal way to get what they want, that's going to, I think, lower the demand for illegal content. And that's part of my message. Part of my message is, competition. The other part is innovation. Let people develop new services. And if the old players don't do it, let new companies come in. Music's a great example, right? The music companies insisted that everybody buy a CD with 15 songs. And Apple said, that's silly. We'll sell you one for 99 cents. The music companies could have done that, but Apple was the innovator. And as a result, Apple makes a lot of money, and they make a lot of money for the music companies. Other questions? Other questions from Afghanistan? Or how about over here? Is your community engaged in the policy making enough? Are you part of the multi-stakeholder process? And enough? Not yet?
Sir, still one problem in Afghanistan on internet access. The speed and the cost is still high. And though the competition of the mobile, we have now 5 3G companies that they provide broadband, but still the internet speed and the cost is high. So how we can come out this issue?
Well, one thing we're seeing in some countries is where there's actually a subsidy. So some of the major internet websites like Google, Facebook, even Wikipedia are working with the ISPs so that when the internet users go to those websites, they get basically free access. So in many countries, you pay a certain amount of money and you get a certain data plan. I'm here in Turkey, and I think I'm paying some outrageous amount to my U.S. internet company. I think it's $30 for 120 megabits or megabytes. That's not very much. But if I had one of these special contracts, I could use Facebook without using up any of my quota. And it's called zero rating or sponsored data. And it's an interesting plan, and it's something that's actually driving development of the internet in South America and in places like Africa. So I think you might want to consider that as an interesting model, and talk to people here at IGF about their own experiences. The good news is the technology just keeps getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. As Mike Goodwin says, smartphones have gone from being a luxury item to something that almost everyone will have in 4 or 5 years.
A few years ago, sir, I had studied a research. There was about nanotechnologies, about this network equipments that will provide 10 times more speed. What's that process going on? Do you have any update?
Well, again, we've gone, the backbone of the internet has gone from megabits to 1 gigabit to 10 gigabits to 40 gigabits, and now we're having 100 gigabit per second for the backbone. The challenge isn't the backbone. The challenge is what we call the last kilometer. And there too, with 4G and 5G, we're making progress. The challenge is to get people using the technology that best suits their needs. So we're shifting people to Wi-Fi so that they don't have to use the cellular network and cause congestion there. Wi-Fi is much less expensive, requires less spectrum. According to the Internet Society, I mentioned the Internet Society Internet Report. They indicate that in the next 3 years, the amount of traffic carried by Wi-Fi is going to double just because there's not enough capacity on the cellular network for all the video and all the Skype traffic that people want to watch. So it's, as long as we have some competition in the system, and you can go around the world and you can look at countries where there's competition and you can see how much faster the technology is rolling out, how many more users. Your country is a good example. I mean, you've come so far in just 10 years. So I think we have another speaker back there, right? Joe? Are you up next, Ellen? Are you up next? Yes, I am. Okay, well, I've just given my entire Georgetown class in 30 minutes, so. All right, well, I can't compete with that. Any last questions for anybody? You have my email address. I hope that you'll send some of your best, most talented young people to come and take our classes at Georgetown. It's really quite amazing.
Can they do that, Mike?
They can if you apply. We have students from all around the world. We don't have it online. We don't webcast our material. We do webcast the Internet Society discussions. I talked earlier about having a debate over whether it's copyright or cybersecurity or net neutrality. We've had debates on all of those topics at the Internet Society chapter in Washington, D.C. And we've had some incredibly smart people debating these topics. It's all been webcast. Some of the things that are going on here, some of these sessions are among the best debates you will hear anywhere on the topics. And you have to look around. You have to find out, which ones are the best. But I'd urge you to look at the Washington, D.C. chapter of the Internet Society. It's ISOC-DC.org. And if you go there, there's a link for ISOC DC TV and 3 years worth of discussions on these topics. Almost all the topics that I presented earlier have been discussed. The last one we did was on net neutrality, and it was the best session I've ever heard on net neutrality. And I've heard lots of sessions on net neutrality. It was really good, and it was comparing the US and Europe. Really, if you can't find it, send me an email. Our next session is going to be 2 weeks from today, and it's all about what we learned at IGF. And so it'll be about midnight in Iraq, but you can tune in, ask questions, and if you don't tune in, you can watch the webcast. It's going to be fun. Thank you very much. I'm glad I had a chance to do an encore performance. I'm very glad that Joe made time for this. And again, I'm online. I've already followed several of you on Twitter, and I look forward to seeing what's going on in your country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you twice.
Thank you twice.
I'll just jump in. Do I need this?
Yeah, and this is right here. Just to start, our next speaker is Ellen Blackler from Disney, which I wrote out the full name. It is the Walt Disney Company.
It is the Walt Disney Company, yes.
And you see a lot of smiles here. There's some Disney fans. Yeah, I think your company always has this kind of reaction, which is wonderful.
We get a lot of smiles, which is nice, because we don't smile very much here at the IGF. So I'll just tell you a little about myself, because I'm also not prepared with my bio to put on the screen. My name is Ellen Blackler, and I work in the Global Public Policy Group at Disney. So we work on policy issues all around the world. I work primarily on internet policy related things, including privacy and children and online safety and things, about internet governance and policy on the internet generally. So my background is I worked for many years in the state legislature in New York State, and then I worked for several years at the FCC, our federal regulator in Washington, and then I worked at AT&T for some time. I'm very old, apparently. I have all of these jobs, but and that's something that I think happens with some frequency in the U.S. and makes for some of the success I think we see in these areas is because people are able to get perspectives and move throughout from government and industry, and you kind of have broader perspective, having worked in government for a while and now trying to advance the same goals on the business side. So that's a benefit that sometimes we really get the advantage of in the US. So I thought I would just talk a little about why we participate in the Internet Governance Forum and in Internet policy generally. And I don't know if, I guess this is folks' first time at the IGF?
Well, we have a couple of repeats. We have Hazem from Iraq, who was here 2 years ago.
Okay.
And we have two of our Afghan attendees who went to Bali.
Okay, so you know, sometimes the first year is very overwhelming, and so you kind of have to just ride the wave the first year, and then the second year you can get a little bit handle on what's going on. Because one of the exciting things about the IGF that also makes it challenging is there's so much going on at any one time that if you try to think you're going to understand everything that happens at the conference, you will be overwhelmed. You can't possibly. So you have to you know, learn to pick and choose. But so we come to these issues because obviously everything is moving online, and that's now where our customers are. And so at Disney, that is where the future is going to be, not just for the kinds of business internal things you use the internet for as a business, but that's really how we reach our customers going forward. And so it's very important to us that we have the framework right for the internet so it can continue to grow and continue to connect all the places that aren't connected, because then a company like us can reach all of those customers, which is, of course, what we're all about. So that is so when we come here, we really focus in three areas. One is the actual structure of internet governance. We're very committed to, I'm sure some of the things you've talked about today, about a multi-stakeholder process that does not kind of fall into the trap of being overly regulated. And so we spend a lot of time on that issue. We also spend a lot of time on two other issues of substance that have been really growing to concern. The first is the availability of local content. It's probably near and dear to many of viewers' hearts. So that we're growing local creative industries and not just you know, having so much of the content be in English and being accessed, you know, from all over the world, but being primarily the English content that the internet started with. So we're very focused on what we can do to grow the creation of content locally. We find that when people get used to finding what they want online, they will eventually find us too. And so we're very interested in having that all that kind of content available. And then we also do a lot of work on the child online protection space. Again, you know, we're Disney, obviously children and families are important to us, but we find in many places that parents are reluctant to let their kids go online because they're concerned about some of the safety risks. And so we work to, you know, kind of solve those problems, eliminate some of the risks, and build the tools and the understanding, the parents, so that they're comfortable bringing their kids online, so that it's not a barrier. And so we both participate in sessions and we sponsor some sessions ourselves to get those issues talked about. I have a panel on Wednesday on the local content. It's at 11:30. I forget what room, but it's called something like Enabling the Local Content Environment. You should all come. And we have, it's Wednesday, day 2, right at 11:30. I have a flyer I can actually give you. I have some content producers from Guatemala, from Africa, from Singapore, talking about what is the environment that allows them to do their work, both in a legal framework, the environment in a country, the policy environment in a country, and also the economic environment that lets them create content locally to be available online. So that will be an exciting panel. And then on Friday, if you still have energy and any energy left, we have a child protection panel. We've been working with the ITU and have produced, the ITU has produced some kind of guidelines on child safety that are being released. And they include kind of best practices for industry, best practices for governments, and best practices for parents about how to bring kids online. So those are the areas that are, I guess, most concern to us, or where we've been most active. And one of the other values of the IGF, of course, that I encourage, which I know Joe is ferrying you through, is really the opportunity just to meet with people and talk to them while they're here. You know, sometimes the sessions are not the most important thing you can do here, but also the meeting with other people, just getting to know the players. Sometimes these issues, you know, you'll hear about an issue for a long time and begin to understand it before it really becomes to a point where there's a decision or a controversy, and so it's helpful to have that background when issues start. So. Questions? Do we take questions?
Thank you for that overview. That was a number of different areas that Ellen's talked about. Were there any questions or anything others would want to raise and ask about?
Tad up here under the light.
My name is Hazem from Ministry of Communication, Iraq. I want to ask about the child protection, because before maybe 10 years, the access to the internet was through PC, and there's no smartphone as much as nowadays. So now there's smartphone, lot of application of social media. So you can access anytime, anywhere. So what is the best thing to do to child protection from?
So what we really stress when we talk about this issue is to understand and use the controls that are available on the devices. And we work with the operators quite a bit for them to improve the controls that are available on the devices. But most of the devices do have, you know, settings and different things you can do to for parents. Our message mostly is that parents need to decide for their kids what is okay. And so our belief is that it shouldn't be the government deciding what the kids should do at what age, that it should be the parents. And so our job is to educate the parents so that they know how to control what their kids have access to. And you know, parents make their own decisions about when to give their child the phone. I mean, in the US, children get phones probably, I'm sure it's different ages in every country, but you know, younger and younger. But we tell parents, you know, you have to be aware of what that device does, and if it accesses the internet and you don't want your kid to access the internet unsupervised, then you can't be giving them that phone unsupervised. And so a lot of it, I think, is an education to the parents so that they are using the tools that are available. So that and there are, you know, content filters out there, and then, you know, the supervision. We deal mostly with young children issues. We don't deal with the teenager issues, because at Disney we're focused on, you know, the 8-year-olds. And I think, you know, one of our big messages is you have to supervise that. You can't be surprised if you give your kid access to the full internet and then been surprised to find out that they're exposed to things that you don't want them to be exposed to.
Well, thanks, Helen. I'm Amar from the Institute for War and Peace Reporting. To me, it sounds a little bit weird for Walt Disney to do this kind of research and this kind of programming. I mean, maybe it's the wrong question for this forum, but I'll ask it anyway. Your division, how big is it within Walt Disney? And how much, your division within the Walt Disney, how big is it? And how much work do you actually do on child safety and on the issues you raised?
So we focus in two ways on the child safety. First is, our belief is that you have to give kids appropriate things to do online, because we know that kids are going to go online, and if there's nothing that's designed for them, they'll go to places that aren't designed for them. And so we have, and that's really core to what we do, right? So we produce, I don't know if people are familiar with Club Penguin, was one of our big products that is kind of a game, virtual world with some social networking features for young children. And so we, you know, have hundreds of people in the company who work on that, deliver that product. That product allows for kids, there's a chat function, so you know, you have a character, you have a penguin, and your penguin can talk to other penguins. It's completely moderated and supervised. We have hundreds of people who, and technical filters that look at all those messages to prevent personal information being exchanged. We prevent bad words. We do it in 8 languages, and we put a huge amount of resources into making that service run, to really minimize the risk to kids. Then, so a lot of what we do commercially is build the things that we think are appropriate for kids to do. Because when they find good, fun things to do, that's where they'll stay. When they go online and they can't find anything to do, that's where they wander off to the inappropriate places. So we really work in both areas, but I think it's important to keep your eye on, you have to give them the good experience, or else they will go off to the bad experience. I'm not sure that quite answered your question.
I mean, yeah, you did, and I think that's a very interesting model for corporate social responsibility, and it's part of the business as well. So, so to your knowledge, is it common practice with the business side, with other companies, or Walt Disney is unique in that approach?
I think we are unique. Certainly, there's certainly a lot of businesses who instead choose to, let me make that not so critical. The regulatory environment is such that people sometimes, instead of trying to solve the problem, they try to ignore the fact that there are children online and say, our service is not for children, our terms of service says children shouldn't use our service, and so it's kind of not our fault if children are using the service. And I think our view is that is not practical. Of course children are using your service, and because, as you say, it's our business is to work in the child space, so we do make a lot of investment. It is a frustration that there's so much, and many of our competitors in the entertainment space, are not investing in the things that would protect children online, and that is where you see in a lot of these virtual worlds where there's the ability for users to talk to each other without supervision, is where you see the really really frightening examples of child exploitation happening. And so, it is a problem. It is a problem. And so that is, and the other message we try to give parents is there are good places for your kids to go online. You invest in those. You direct your kids there. But it's very difficult. There has been some enforcement against some of these other companies from a privacy perspective, interestingly, because a lot of the serious danger to children comes from the exchange of personal information. So children giving their phone numbers, giving their identities, that then leads to, really bad activity. And in some countries, that's unlawful for a child to share, for you to create a situation where a child is allowed to share that information is actually a violation of the privacy law. And so in the UK in particular, and in the US, they have done some enforcement of that, saying by allowing that kind of chatting, you're allowing the collection of personal information that is unlawful. So it's kind of an interesting way to get at the problem, because then you can say to the company, you have to build your system in a way that prevents the sharing of personal information, even between users. So there has been some enforcement there. It's difficult on these services that are not designed for children, like, Facebook. I mean, since we're in a small group, we can talk about a service like that where, it's not designed for children. And, 10-year-olds, 8-year-olds shouldn't be on Facebook without, really Facebook would say it all, certainly not without their parents' permission. And so it is a challenge for a company like that really is intentionally trying not to have children on it. But, it is difficult to police. I don't want to make it sound like their job is easy. So what we have done is designed our whole system so that they can't exchange that kind of information. But, the goal of a child's game is not to share information. Like the goal of a Facebook is to share personal details. So it's a very different environment, certainly.
Any more questions? Well, I don't want to cut this short, but you are invited to join us for lunch.
Oh, thank you. I have somewhere else to be.
Oh, okay. So if there aren't any other questions, I'm just making sure. We haven't allowed a whole lot of time for lunch, so perhaps we can thank you now for coming.
I'll get my flyer for my session and I'll give it to you all.
All right. And I think
my email is on there too, so that will be good.
Good. So she'll get that so we can contact her. Our agenda will have lunch. Sirhan says they're now going to set the lunch up right outside, which will be very convenient. It helps us also because we've scheduled our next speaker for 1 p.m. That's a short lunch, and if we can't make it, we'll see. But let's try for 1 p.m. if that's okay. And then we'll pick up in the afternoon talking with Laura Motaz from the Department of State. And Sirhan handed out when we first started today the schedule for today, the schedule for the week. We do that. Anything before we break for lunch? Okay. Let's eat.
I just found the information that I need to ask question.
Bonus question. We're big on round twos here.
You have cars.
The stereotype from outside, they thought we are still old and we have just the violence. Yeah.
So, I think that's an interesting point for, certainly something I think that is often a problem in the West, right, with respect to the Arab world, but really so many stereotypes in the media. And I think a big company like ours is always struggling with how to be both entertaining and sensitive. And I think from the broader question about the media, the way we solve this is make sure that there's lots of voices making cartoons and being successful so that those stereotypes don't get a chance to take hold. And so that is, I think, one of the one of the benefits of the internet is we should be able to see more kinds of creation and, people not relying on the US companies' portrayal of all of these cultures. So one of the things that I think the benefits from this from the push to get more local content is that you would have more voices and, an opportunity to push back on these kind of stereotypes. I mean, I can't defend the American media. Certainly, women is another example where the stereotypes of women in the media are just endemic, and it's a very hard thing to solve. But the way we solve that is we get more women producing the content, and then you make sure that perspectives are actually reflected, and so it's not, misconceptions. So come to my session and ask that question.
Thank you again.
Okay.
Thank you for coming.